Undead Unluck has been around for some time now, almost 5 years. In January, a couple months, it will hit that milestone. The anime came out a lot more recently. It first began airing just over a year ago and only concluded its run in March this year. So a proper 24 episode season of anime. I don't know if it's just me, but it feels like anime with 24 episode seasons are becoming fewer and far between. So the first season of Undead Unluck felt like it was around for a while itself, since the 24 episodes would air across an entire half of a year. And back to the manga, I've only just caught up to it now. Chapter 230 is the very first chapter I've read as an official weekly reader of the series, and since it has been around for as long as it has, it doesn't really fit the role of one of the next flag bearers of Shonen Jump like a Kagurabachi or something, but even so, this story deserves so much more respect. This is obviously from my point of view, but the disparity between the hype or lack thereof that it gets compared to the quality of the story is huge from my own experience watching and then catching up reading. Why haven't I seen more people talking about how unbelievably good Undead Unluck is? Why didn't I read it earlier? There seems to be like an initiation barrier that one has to breach when consuming the story. For example, with One Piece, there's the saying that you just need to get past the first few hundred episodes and you'll enjoy it, which is completely wrong. Well, I mean, to each their own, but from the moment I started watching One Piece, it was great. With Undead Unluck and with my so far limited experience with its community, there's also a recurring idea about getting into it, and that is you need to get past the early perviness. We are introduced to two characters, one who runs around butt naked all the time, while the other is a well-endowed girl whose powers are conditional on skin-to-skin contact. A wild combination, and whether you want to put it down to the author or the industry or the culture or the target demographic, this kind of content is everywhere in the anime and manga world, and I'm not saying you're not allowed to dislike it, of course you are, but it's just one of those things that comes with the territory, if that makes sense. So there's a few situations here and there at the beginning that lean into that more adult side of things, but worry not, this aspect is not a major mainstay in the story, and the story itself is far bigger than that. And believe it or not, even those moments have a greater meaning as well. As for the two main characters, we have Unluck, Fuuko Izumo, and Andy the Undead, two wildly different personalities with equally depressing stories. Fuuko is at the end of her rope thanks to the curse of her ability taking away any chance she has of living a normal life, whereas Andy cannot find the end of his rope because his curse is that of immortality, where a normal life is just as impossible. And their misfortunes are what brings them together. These abilities that they have, these ultimately very important abilities they have, aren't blessings, they aren't something to marvel at. And to bring back that perviness, it turns out Andy's motivations to begin with were purely selfish. Being unable to die, Fuuko's unluck could be a means to an end for him after all of these years, so to begin with, she's kind of just a tool to him, even though that changes very quickly. And on the other side, Fuuko has finally found someone who can stay by her side and withstand her trail of disaster, which inevitably joins them at the hip as they partner up as their relationship grows, in search of the greatest death ever. And the extended cast share similar circumstances, having some unique power and having had to deal with their own terrible situations that's pushed them out of regular society, leaving the only people they can find solace with being each other. And what surrounds this thread of loneliness and belonging is some of either the most heartwarming or chaotic stuff. I think that the balance this story has managed to find with these different aspects works really well. I don't find myself taken out of a moment because of a poor placement of a joke. It doesn't clash with itself and lets moments breathe. When the story gets dark, when things become more serious, it will let that feeling sit for a bit. Like with Fuuko, who has to come to terms with herself and her past. Maybe we saw her and Andy goofing off a couple minutes ago, but when the time comes for her character to think, to remember, you'll feel that tonal shift, and it's not like you'll be hitting a brick wall. It will be a flow between these moments. And to add to this, remember the whole thing about Andy being naked all the time with that massive sensor bar covering his nether regions? One of the things about it is that it's really not that big of a deal. It's brought up a few times, like whenever Fuuko sees him in the nude, but it also just becomes a part of him. One, because of how he utilizes his undead abilities, and two, because that's Andy, that's who he is for the whole world to see. A very loud, outgoing person, very cocky, pun intended. The two of them have ridiculously good chemistry as well. They aren't just good characters in their own rights, they make an amazing duo. One does not outshine the other, but complements the other. Like in the Spoil arc, where Andy fulfills the dream of a zombified teacher who ends up being way more emotionally relevant to the arc than you'd expect, and Fuuko shines when she takes a stand directly face to face with Spoil itself. Seeing Andy take the initiative is great since it brings this sort of chaos where honestly he will just do whatever, like marrying a zombie. When Fuuko takes the initiative, you know there's going to be some kind of greater sentiment in her words or actions because we know she's been driven to the absolute brink, so everything she does has that extra bit of purpose, of resolve, that bit of courage that becomes synonymous with her character, which I'll expand upon in the brief manga spoiler section at the end. They both provide comedy and they both provide depth. Back to Andy once again, I find his plight with immortality to be very interesting because, and I don't mean to give anyone an existential crisis here, but we will all die one day, which is a scary thought. That one day you won't, well, you just won't. That's the best way to describe it. People do have different perspectives on it, but what I'm trying to say is that as scary as that seems, immortality matches that sense of dread in my opinion. Imagine that you couldn't die. You would see with your own two eyes everyone you ever knew or loved leaving you behind. You'd watch the whole world you knew disappear and rise again, knowing full well you couldn't do anything. You're free to do as you wish, but at the same time, you are trapped in this infinite tragedy of watching everything collapse, and you're stuck with only your own thoughts, and maybe those will cease as well since your mental state will deteriorate. So with Andy, he is insanely reckless, which makes sense since he knows he can't die and is looking for a way to, but he is also a good person. When he and Fuuko join forces, he treats her with care, acts fairly, and is honest. His long life hasn't taught him to live without care or conscience, but it's ironically taught him about the finality of things, of everything around him, like his comrades in the past and Fuuko in the present. He's learned to cherish what he has, or had. And then there's the power system, which is obviously one of the best parts of the story. There are negators who negate certain rules, who are embodied by Uma, unidentified mysterious animals who each are the personification of specific rules, with rules being sort of an umbrella term for the ideas of the universe. For example, Fuuko has the ability of unluck, meaning she is the negator of luck, which is why she is unlucky. Then there is the Uma spoil, which embodies the idea of spoiling and decaying. There are phenomenon type Uma who embody physical phenomena like change and spoil, and there are concept type Uma like the seasons, which embody more abstract concepts. As for the negators, there are self-targeting and external targeting, which is self-explanatory, and then there are compulsory and voluntary activation types where they both need a condition met, but one is activated when the user wants, whereas the other is activated regardless of the user's wishes. Then there is Apocalypse, an artifact who issues quests that can be completed to postpone the end of the world Ragnarok. So starting with Umas. What's so cool about them is that they encompass the concepts of what we know and give them a greater meaning. Like the Uma galaxy, before it was added, there was just Earth, but after it was added, the entire universe was given existence with a full history, and suddenly aliens exist and they want to attack Earth. Each Uma takes a simple idea and makes it a catastrophe pretty much. Everything changes. Then with the negators, they can negate a rule with their abilities, but on top of that, their memories aren't altered by the addition of a new rule, like the rest of the world is. This layout gives the system such a wide range of potential while also retaining its core structure. And my absolute favorite thing about it is actually a spoiler, so I will say one last thing now and then end with a short manga spoiler section. So let me just say that for those who are anime onlys, or maybe you've never read the series and you're watching this, the manga fulfilled the expectations that I was given from watching season 1 of the anime. So now there are manga spoilers ahead. Since the power system revolves around ideas and concepts, it's completely up to interpretation over how these powers should function, and it's how the negator characters grow in the series. This also means that each ability is molded by how a character defines their abilities. They make themselves. And adding to how the rules came into being and how the negators were just toys to be tormented by a higher power, this whole power system is built on the idea of these people turning a curse into a blessing. I also love that there is the equivalent of a final war manga ending battle in the middle of the series, That definitely made the stakes feel all the more real, and Fuuko's emotions as she sits at the round table feel more organic, as she had to wait for the loop and just watch. And what I thought was a very bold decision was to have Andy absent from the manga for that long. Since when the end of the Ragnarok arc to chapter 219, he wasn't present, not including his clone that fought Umasik. I thought it worked out really well, since even though Fuuko made more friends throughout the story, Andy is her rock, so taking him out of the equation basically meant she was on her own working from scratch, and it did wonders for her character, as well as the side cast. The recruitment of all of the negators from Union and Under to form the new Union I thought did wonders for fleshing out the supporting characters, but I can see how it may have gotten repetitive for some people, but I was able to read it all the way through in one go in a very short period of time, so my experience with the story is very different from someone who read it weekly, but I had a great time the whole way through. There's so much that I haven't mentioned about the story, like I didn't go into detail about the supporting characters, I didn't discuss the character relationships or the wider narrative. I never mentioned Juiz or Victor once in this video, and they are arguably just as important as Fuuko and Andy. There's so much to this story, and while writing this I came across a video talking about the manga potentially getting cancelled. I didn't actually watch that video and I haven't done any extra research into that, so I have no idea how true that is. But the mere thought of doing that is just stupid. After 230 chapters, why ruin the ending by cancelling it? Especially with other major manga having just ended, why cancel it? I'm not really good at gauging how close a manga is to ending without some kind of author comment or something like that, like saying there are 5 chapters left or that the story has entered its final saga. But Undead Unluck does feel like it's reaching that point of its final stretch. Andy's big return was kind of the signifier, so I'm just happy that I caught up before the end, regardless of how close that ending actually is.